Tragedy in Masaka, the murder of Stephanie Anderson, and the darkness of Akin Kanyomozi. It was a bright, sunny afternoon in March of 1993 when the tranquil, picturesque town of Masaka, Uganda, was shattered by an act of brutality that would forever stain the reputation of Akin Kanyomozi, a former student of St. Mary's College Kasubi, SMAC, and a man with a dark and violent past. Akin Kanyomozi, who would later gain notoriety for his series of violent crimes, had already been making a name for himself as a dangerous individual. But this particular act, the gruesome murder of an American volunteer, would send shockwaves through the community and beyond Uganda's borders. The victim, 32-year-old Stephanie Anderson, was a bright, compassionate young woman from California. She had come to Uganda as part of a humanitarian mission, seeking to assist with local education and development projects. Having always dreamed of helping underserved communities, Stephanie was enthusiastic about her time in Uganda and had already spent several months working with a local non-governmental organization, NGO, dedicated to education and children's rights. Her work involved teaching children in rural areas and helping them gain skills that would enable them to improve their lives. Stephanie had formed close bonds with the children she taught and had even started a small scholarship fund to support talented students in their studies. The people around her described her as kind, warm, and selfless. She was passionate about her work and had developed a deep love for Uganda and its people. However, the very day that would ultimately take Stephanie's life was just like any other. She had spent the morning in one of the local villages, where she was working on a project aimed at creating a sustainable farming initiative to combat malnutrition. Afterward, she returned to her small house in Masaka, where she lived alone, to rest before returning to her duties the next day. Akin Kanyomozi, by contrast, was a man whose life had taken a much darker path. Akin had been a student at SMAC, a prestigious school in Uganda, where he was known for his intelligence and ambition. However, beneath his outward appearances of success, Akin harbored deep psychological and emotional issues that went largely unnoticed. During his years at SMAC, he became known for his increasingly erratic behavior. Some of his peers recalled instances of violent outbursts, but no one could have predicted the depth of his criminal tendencies. By the time he crossed paths with Stephanie, Akin had become a man consumed by darkness, one who was capable of the most heinous acts. On the fateful afternoon in question, Stephanie had gone out to visit a nearby market to buy supplies for her educational projects. Akin Kanyomozi had been following her for several days, quietly observing her from a distance. He had become obsessed with her, the foreign volunteer who had seemed so different, so compassionate. Akin saw an opportunity that day. He knew the route Stephanie would take back to her home in Masaka, and he had meticulously planned the attack. As she walked along a quiet path near the outskirts of town, he pounced. Armed with a machete he had stolen from a nearby farm, he grabbed Stephanie from behind. Her screams echoed down the empty road, but there was no one around to hear her cries for help. The first blow landed on her head with a sickening thud. It was a savage, brutal strike that left Stephanie stunned and bleeding. She stumbled, trying to escape, but Akin was relentless. With every swing of the machete, he carved through her flesh, leaving deep gashes and cuts. Stephanie collapsed to the ground, her life slowly slipping away. But Akin Kanyomozi wasn't finished. In his deranged state, he took pleasure in the power he held over his helpless victim. He dragged her to a nearby patch of brush, out of sight from any potential witnesses. There, he continued his assault, methodically and savagely, cutting at her body in a manner that seemed to hold no sense of urgency, but only a need for destruction. It wasn't until several hours later that Stephanie's body was discovered. Her fellow volunteers, who had grown concerned about her whereabouts, began searching for her when she failed to return home. It was in the evening, just as the sun began to set, that they found her lifeless body, a scene of horror that left them speechless and heartbroken. The news of Stephanie's murder spread quickly, both in Uganda and across the globe. Her family in the United States was devastated by the news. The organization she had volunteered with, along with other humanitarian groups in the region, expressed their outrage and sorrow. Akin Kanyomozi was arrested shortly after the murder. Initially, he had attempted to flee the area, but the police were able to track him down using the evidence left at the scene and the testimony of witnesses who had seen him near the market where Stephanie had last been. Aiken was apprehended in a small town outside of Masaka, and his arrest was met with mixed reactions. Some were shocked by the brutality of the crime, while others, familiar with his violent past, were not entirely surprised. During his trial, Akin Kanyamozi showed no remorse for his actions. He was cold and calculated, refusing to offer any explanation for his brutal attack. His defense claimed that he had been mentally unstable, but there was little sympathy for him. The court found him guilty of murder, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment. In prison, Aiken's behavior became even more alarming. He became known for his violent tendencies and his ability to manipulate those around him. Reports surfaced that he had taught fellow inmates how to strangle others, cementing his reputation as a dangerous individual who thrived on violence and control. Stephanie Anderson's tragic death left a permanent mark on those who knew her and the communities she served. The NGO where she worked established a scholarship in her honor, continuing her mission of education and empowerment. Her family, though grieving, found solace in knowing that her work had impacted many lives in Uganda. Akin Kanyamozi, on the other hand, would spend the rest of his life behind bars. His story serves as a chilling reminder of the depths of human depravity and the dangers that lurk beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary individuals. For those who knew Stephanie, the memory of her kindness and selflessness would remain, even as they struggled to comprehend the violence that had taken her life.